question.
Okay, Isaac and Helen, you guys can take over.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura. And it's a pleasure to see all your beautiful faces out there. This is something that's new for all of us. And I think that the last 2 years we've had a Youth United camp in person, but it's so unprecedented that we're online virtual. So thanks for joining. I'm Isaac. I am a soon-to-be freshman at the University of Michigan. But I'm here today with two guests and my co-host, Helen Lehman. And we are here with Erika Vivyan and Aashka Soni. They actually have some roots here in Farmington Hills with CARES. And I'm going to ask Erika. Erika, if you're there, do you mind giving a brief introduction?
Yeah, I can do that. So my name is Erika Vivyan. I was recruited by our lovely Todd Lippa to join the Mayor's Youth Council when I was, I think, a sophomore in high school at Harrison in Farmington Hills, which is since closed. That's how old I am. But I worked with Mayor's Youth Council for a few years and then started a Youth Dialogues program, actually modeled on a curriculum that Todd also drew me into at the University of Michigan. So all of this points back to Todd. And then I started working on a curriculum to be used in Farmington Public Schools, and actually Aashka came on board to help me out with that, and the curriculum is still being used there. Then I went on to study educational psychology. I studied psychology at Michigan State University, and then I studied educational psychology and earned my doctorate at Wisconsin. So I'm still involved in working on a lot of these issues related to social justice through a mental health lens. And now I'm down in Austin, Texas, and I work with kids and families in schools to do a lot of similar work that y'all are doing through your organization.
Awesome. Thank you, Erika. Yeah, it's really a privilege to have you here with us today. We don't know where Aashka is at the moment, but hopefully she'll be joining us soon. She's actually on the West Coast. Aashka is on the West Coast, so there might be some logistical time differences. It is like 7:30 for her, but we are psyched to have Erika here. She is an awesome, innovative individual who really represents what we want from you guys to get from this experience. So Helen, I'm gonna ask Helen, what's up? My co-host over here, what's going on? What's cooking?
Hi. Okay, so I have a question for Erika. Can you just describe to us what it was like meeting Aashka? What were your first thoughts on her? How did you get to know her? Stuff like that.
That's a really cool question, especially because she's not here. I don't know if I remember the first time meeting Aashka, but I know that it was likely in a Mayor's Youth Council meeting. So similar to the types of meetings that y'all have where you're bringing in kids from all over the community. And Aashka and I happen to share our hometown, Farmington Hills, but we grew up in different parts of our hometown. She attended North Farmington High School and I was at Harrison. So really different schools, both very diverse and socially justice-oriented student populations. But as soon as I met Aashka, I could tell she was the type of student that had her stuff together and knew that she wanted to make a big difference. So I knew that she was someone that I could rely on as I was trying to further the goal of having our social justice curriculum in Farmington Public Schools, to have another ally like Aashka, who's in a different community, a different school. She's Indian American, she doesn't look like me, so we could collaborate and actually bring our different ideas together. And she was just that organized, passionate human that I knew could help me bring that curriculum and push it forward. And it worked. So having her on the team, having Todd supporting both of us in the fact that he just listens to young folks and pushes their idea forward no matter how crazy we sounded, that Aashka and I were able to be similar enough in our work ethic, and I could tell that from the start of meeting her.
Awesome.
Really
Yeah.
cool. Yeah. I have a question. So what sparked the idea for Dialogues on Diversity? Was it an idea from you two, or was it someone on the Mayor's Youth Council?
So it was an idea that I had after going through the University of Michigan intergroup dialogue program, which, like I mentioned in my intro, was something that I distinctly remember that phone call from Todd because I was driving my parents' minivan or something. And he called me up and said, hey, we need a group of white kids from Farmington Hills to get together, talk about race and understand each other, and then start meeting with different groups from different races and ethnicities in the Metro Detroit area. So once I went through that experience and I got to really in-depth think about how I was experiencing my race in my community in Farmington Hills, then I got to start speaking with other kids across the Metro Detroit area. And really what struck me was the difference in our experience in our education based on where we lived, based on our race, based on how taxes were funding the schools in our area. And that's something that I still work on passionately through educational psychology. So I realized that through that, I wanted to bring that information and that experience of talking across groups to the Farmington Hills community, because Metro Detroit is so segregated and so diverse, but having those conversations across groups of people can really inform kids in terms of what they want to do, how they want to bring their experience and passion into the world. And that's something that I think Aashka and I both share in terms of where we are, where we came from, and now how we're implementing that in our daily lives. And that curriculum was an idea that I had through thinking, hey, I learned about this in high school and I need more people to learn about this in high school so that we can all make informed decisions when we graduate and go on to higher education in our careers.
Gotcha. Erika, question. So right now, that program in particular is such a pioneer in topics like diversity. How do you replicate that in other schools, and what obstacles came up for you guys?
Yeah, I think replicating that in other schools is a really interesting idea, because Aashka and I were reminiscing about how we came up with the structure of the program, and it really focused on like our community and the different identities that are in our community and how our personal identities interact with those of others. So the curriculum would look really different if you implemented it in Southfield versus West Bloomfield versus anywhere else in the state or the country. And that's cool because it has to be customized to who is in the room and which identities we have to navigate through. And then the second part of your question, can you remind me again?
Yeah. So what obstacles did you encounter when you were trying to pilot the program?
The obstacles were like the amount of adult support, honestly, that you need when you are a high school student thinking through a program. In some ways we didn't have those obstacles because we had Todd to advocate for us. And in some ways we did, that we still needed to convince the superintendent of schools, who was wonderful, Sue Zervalik at the time. And we had to convince state legislature to write this into something that needs to be addressed in high school curriculum. We had to, as very, very young adults, not even adults, teenagers, convince adults that we knew what we were talking about and that this was important compared to all of the other things that adults think about when they are trying to put together high school curriculum and prepare kids to become socially conscious adults. In addition to other areas of the curriculum that are required by the state, like algebra and history. But we thought that this was equally, if not more, important to our functioning as adult humans. So we had to put together a lot of information to convince adults that this was necessary. And fortunately, we had a lot of adults who were there to listen to us. And that is the power of something like Youth United.
Okay, sorry, I was gonna turn on my mic, but it was already on. I was just wondering, what were some of the ideas or discussions that you wanted to implement into the program? What did you think was important for students to learn? I know you were talking about just how hard it was to convince people that it was important. What were some things that were important?
Some of the ideas that I thought were most important for me as a white kid growing up in Farmington Hills were things like that our country is frankly still grappling with today, understanding power and privilege in the context specifically of race and ethnicity, but also in the context of gender identity across the continuum, in the context of socioeconomic status and how that interplays with all of our other held identities. I remember writing the curriculum in a way where I took lessons from social psychology and sociology and put those into the curriculum. So things that I use today, even in my work as a psychologist, are things like Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, which was actually a major part of my dissertation. But I remember learning that through the University of Michigan intergroup dialogues, putting that in my curriculum because I thought it was so powerful to understand the spheres of influence we have at the individual, the family, the community, the school. I needed more people to understand that so that we could collaborate and see eye to eye and create real social change. So I took those lessons and embedded them into the curriculum, and Aashka, who had gone through the intergroup dialogues program as well, took some of those lessons that she had learned and that stuck out to her, and we integrated those into the curriculum. So each of those little pieces, we had to make sure, like, okay, this is something that we know and is researched and has helped us to understand our identity as students in this context. So how can we spread that knowledge and then have a dialogue about it in order to fully process and integrate that into who we are as people moving forward.
Awesome. You guys, we're joined here by Aashka from the West Coast. We're so happy that she's here. If you guys have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat. But Aashka, do you mind giving just a brief introduction of your background?
Yeah, hi guys. I'm sorry, I had it wrong Pacific time in my calendar. Hi everyone, I'm Aashka. I'm born and raised in Farmington Hills, Michigan. I met Erika probably when I was 15, I think, and I had just found her posting about, hey, I need some help working on this idea that I have, and I reached out to her, and I think it was the start of a wonderful story where I met Erika and Todd and kind of got involved in this youth dialogues program that Erika had talked about, and it was the first time I think I found something I was so passionate about and kind of saw a spot for myself there to continue to help push it forward. So we worked on that for probably, I think, those last 3 years of high school. And then I went on to the University of Michigan just next door, where I took my work in dialogues and I thought about, how can I take my love for education and bring it to business, which is what I was studying. And so during those 4 years, I started a program called DEN, which is Detroit Entrepreneurship Network. And we bring together high school students that don't look like each other and have them start businesses together and kind of learn that idea of not only working with others who don't look like them, but doing good things in our community and making sure that business leaders are making the right decisions that ultimately impact the community. So I did that, and that was very clearly tied to dialogues. And then after that, I came out here to California, where I've spent probably the last 5 years working in advertising and partner development at Google and now at Apple. So thanks for having me here today. I'm excited to talk with you guys.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Aashka, for being here. We're so excited to have your business acumen, and we love the presence that both of you guys bring. We have a question from the chat. So I'm going to tailor this to kind of both of you guys. So I think Brendan, was wondering, that's Karen. Karen was wondering, have you guys faced any resistance from teens when trying to pose these programs?
I think that's a really interesting question, because we spoke a little bit before Aashka jumped on about the resistance that we got from adults and the support we needed from adults to convince them. But I think for teens and adults, the way that we were addressing identity issues in the classroom as we were writing this curriculum was a little foreign. And I think there were some teenagers that were like, well, why do I want to talk about my race or my gender and ways that I'm disadvantaged or not disadvantaged, because it's really hard to talk about the privilege that we all have. I think we met some resistance there. But the cool part was, I think because Aashka and I were so young, we're like, well, we're just going to keep pushing forward and do this because we know it's important. So we didn't meet enough resistance to scare us, which is really powerful looking back.
Agreed.
Awesome. Yeah, we were wondering, so we have some younger students in the room. If you were to give them a tidbit of advice or something going forward, what would you tell them?
I think for me, it was just be fearless. I know when Erica and I were talking before, we just reflected on, I mean, we had no idea, at least I didn't, how impactful the work was going to be. We were kind of just going about the steps that, you know, what we thought was right at the time. And only 5 or 6 years later did I reflect back on it and think, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I went to those rooms and asked, you know, all of these people for them to sign off on this curriculum. Like even now I look back and I'm like, okay, Aashka, pull that courage out of you that you had when you were 15, because I didn't even realize what I was asking for and, you know, how methodological like Erica and I were when we were going about it.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting that you bring that up. Like we walked into rooms like with, like I said, the school superintendent and the state legislature, and we're like, we want this, so please help us. I mean, I don't think I realized at the time that people could have said no, but we had the backing of Todd and the Mayor's Youth Council and then the superintendent. And I was like, well, nobody can stop us now. So that fearlessness that you have and that passion that you have when you're younger, if you just like pull that through line through your adult career, you're in a really good spot.
Totally, yeah. What do you guys think, or like, what did the program look like, and how can we accomplish, you know, this understanding? What did your program look like for the students?
I can speak to a little bit of the curriculum. I'm assuming it felt differently for all the different students we had going through it, but I know that at the beginning we were just focusing on diversity of self. And well, actually, no, we took it a step back. The first 2 weeks were learning how to relearn. I remember we spent 2 weeks just kind of training students in a different method of learning, which might be conversation or might be kind of really reflecting on themselves. And I think that was one of the most difficult times because all of a sudden you're taking students used to going to a textbook and going back home. And now we're just flipping the script on them and either having them watch videos at home and coming to school to have a conversation or whatever it looks like. And then during that time, it was also, you know, all of a sudden these students are asking themselves questions they probably haven't had the chance to ask, or students who have been very aware of them being the only certain thing in a room. So it was just, that was an extremely reflective moment at the beginning.
Yeah, and the way that the curriculum was really set up, like we emphasize, I think we keep saying the word dialogue, and I think at the very beginning of the course, the curriculum, we had to define what dialogue was. And I distinctly remember this little infographic we had about dialogue versus discussion versus debate. And someone just put in the chat, like, how did we manage like that with when we're having a classroom full of people with different racial and ethnic backgrounds? How do you have like a civilized conversation about race? Because at this moment in history, that feels really weird and sometimes impossible. But hosting the class as a dialogue with the instructor as the facilitator to say, okay, I'm going to pose these questions and allow that open conversation, but having specific ground rules on who needs to step up and who needs to step back when someone's getting too much airtime, especially for those of us who hold different levels of privilege, and ensuring that the dialogue does not become a simple discussion where no one's like stating opinions, and it doesn't become a debate where people start to say like, you're wrong or that's not true, because that's not productive. So coming up with like a shared understanding, and then moving forward and how do we actually host a dialogue, and then like Aashka said, having an understanding of how your diversity of self, your different identities as a unique human play out in your school, in your community, in your state, in the greater world. So that was kind of the progression of how we had to learn and host the class. And it's interesting looking back on that now, like we had spoken about last week, like we both have to use that understanding of how to dialogue instead of discuss or debate in our work, as Aashka is working in the business world and as I'm working in individual and group therapy settings, that I have to use some of those same rules and understand how much airspace we have and how much a common understanding of the discussion topics is really critical.
Yeah, thank you so much. You guys are awesome for real. I have a question. What do you think kids like us, kids in Youth United, middle school, high school age, can do to make a difference? Because it's kind of hard to just out of the blue start up a curriculum. So what do you think could be small steps for people in the community?
I think for me, my advice, that's a tough question. I wish someone could give that to me today too. I think my advice would be find something that you're passionate about, or even if you have a little itch. Like, I had a student in Den who was very passionate about women's self-defense, and it was a niche, but it was something that was needed. And I really encouraged her to kind of take that, run with it, and just, set up a session with the community. So it can be something like that where, you are passionate about it or have interest in it. It might be music, it might be something else. And is that an avenue for you to create community or make change with people who you'd like to connect with? I think that's an easy way to kind of hop in and continue to do what you love.
Yeah, and to build on that, like, definitely, like, if you have a passion, grab onto that. And it doesn't have to be, like, when you start out in a project like this, like, it doesn't have to be a long-term, long-standing thing. I don't think that I envisioned that at all for Youth Dialogues. I was like, we should have, like, a one-time event. And then it morphed into this other thing. So creating something that's a one-time event, or an annual event that you want to raise money for a specific cause, or find something where it feels manageable for you and the people that you have supporting you, and then grow from there. Because I didn't know when I started this that Aashka was going to walk into Mayor's Youth Council and be like, count me in, and we could build this to be so much bigger because we built it together. But I didn't know that starting out. So I was like, okay, well, this is what I've got. And then it can grow as different people build in their passion. So understanding your passion, starting small, and then building that and seeing where it goes. It's another way of, like, kind of relinquishing that control and being fearless. But when you've got that passion, it feels like you're going somewhere with it. And that feels awesome.
Awesome, you guys. That was incredible. Virtual round of applause. But for you guys, thank you all for joining. Aashka and Erika, it's been a real pleasure. We